Okay, continuing on with my commentary on Albert Pike's Morals and Dogma. On the bottom of page 8, he says, "You entered the lodge between two columns. They represent the two which stood on the porch in Solomon's temple on each side of the great eastern gateway. These pillars of bronze were called Jachin and Boaz." I'm not going to go through all the details that he talks about. I'll let you read that. This is pretty self-explanatory. He describes the physical characteristics of it found in and described in the second book of Kings. He talks about the pillar or column on the right was named after the Hebrew translation as Jachin, and on the left was Boaz, and they signify "he shall establish, and in it is strength," as the Bible teaches. These columns were imitations by Curum, the Tyrian artist, of the great columns consecrated to the winds and fire at the entrance at the famous temple of Malkart in the city of Tyre. I thought that was interesting. Pillars of fire and the winds. He talks about the globes on the columns, which he doesn't think is an authentic touch. And then he talks about the Hebrew characteristics of Jachin, probably Yakayan, and meant as a verbal noun, "he that strengthens," and so it has by implication something to be firm or stable or upright, and the word Boaz is strength, power, might, refuge. It's similar to a fort, etc. So the idea could be a strengthening. He says Jachin also means "he will establish" or plant in an erect position. From the verb kun, "he stood erect," it probably means the active and vivifying energy and force, and Boaz is the stability and the permanence in the passive sense. It's kind of an interesting. Then he talks about the dimensions of the lodge, and he says it represents the covering is no less than a canopy of heaven. So see here again, this is this connection with the heaven and the earth idea. This is on page 9. And he says, "It is to this that the mason's mind is continually directed, and thither he hopes at last to arrive by the aid of the theological ladder, which Jacob in his vision saw ascending from earth to heaven, the three principal rounds of which are denominated faith, hope, and charity, and which admonish us to have faith in God, hope in immortality, and charity to all mankind." So, continuing on page 10, "Accordingly a ladder, sometimes with 9 rounds, is seen in the chart, resting at the bottom of the earth. Its top is in the clouds, the stars shining above it. And this is deemed to represent that mystic ladder. And this is the one that Jacob saw in his dream, set up on the earth, and the top of it reaching to heaven, with the angels of God ascending and descending down upon it." I have some really good biblical scholar analysis of this. Someday I'll probably share it with you. Pretty interesting. He says the symbolism of the three is a modern construct of the ladder. Now the ancients counted the 7 ancient planets, of course. The moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. There were 7 heavens and 7 spheres of these planets. On all the monuments of Mithras are 7 altars of pyres consecrated to the 7 planets, as were the 7 lamps of the golden calendrum in the temple. These represented the planets, according to Clement of Alexandria in his Stromata, and by Philo Judaeus. So he begins to introduce us to this concept of sacred numbers, which he will get way more into in the Fellowcraft degree in chapter 2. And I've already indicated some idea on the symbolism of how sacred numbers are so important because of certain characteristics of groups of 3 or 5 or even the number 1. And I discussed how geometry plays into this. And in fact, while I'm at it, turning back here, I thought after I made my video, the idea of geometry teaching moral truths It's very interesting within Freemasonry. The circle, I showed you the idea of the triangle, having the wisdom, power, and the harmony between the two as three, as a triangle of just and due proportion. The circle represents deity, the square can represent earth, and the idea of acting with someone upon the square is being fair and square with him. There's no cheating, there's no stealing. And then, of course, you have the triangle as harmony, so that we can literally see, I don't know if you can see my little hand drawing or not much light. The circle is deity, the square symbolizes the earth, fair square deal, and the triangle has harmony between power and wisdom. So geometry really, literally does teach moral truths, as well as mathematical structures here on the earth, of course, and with all the sacred geometry and numbers put into the temples anciently, the circles, the squares, the triangles, etc. It's very interesting how all of this ties in together with the various teachings of Freemasonry. Looks like I got a Facebook notice. Sorry. So, the idea here is the principle of returning to the source. The source is in the infinite. In the human soul, the ancients held that the human soul had to ascend as it had descended through the seven spheres, thus it had to ascend. And this principle is taught. The ladder by which it reascends has, according to Marsilius Ficinus, in his commentary on the Aeneid of Plotinus, 7 degrees or steps. So you have the idea of the 7 steps. And in the Mysteries of Mithras, carried to Rome under the emperors, the ladder with its 7 rounds was a symbol referring to this ascent through the spheres of heaven of the 7 planets. And this is what Jacob was seeing, apparently, as he saw the ascent through the spheres of the 7 planets. He saw God ascending and descending on it, and even above it, to the deity himself. The Mithraic mysteries were celebrated in caves, which they were, where gates were marked at the 4 equinoctial points and solstitial points of the zodiac. My heater just turned on. I hope that doesn't goof you up sound-wise. And the 7 planetary spheres were represented, which souls must need traverse in descending from the heaven of the fixed stars to the elements that envelop the earth. And the 7 gates were marked, one for each planet through which they pass, in descending or returning. So this is interesting. We learn this from Celsus in Oregon, one of the early church fathers, who says that the symbolic image of this passage among the stars, used in the Mithraic mysteries, was a ladder reaching from earth to heaven. So it's very, very interesting how the various ancient religions and cultures had a lot of the same, not only the physical symbolism, but the number symbolism. And Freemasonry has adapted a lot of this to help explain its concepts. Not that the Freemasonic information has a direct tie to the ancient information. That's not what we claim. But we are definitely in the same spirit and impression and use of the ancient symbolisms with their religious, philosophical, and various important meanings for us to comprehend the mysteries. And the number 7, of course, with the 7 gates and the 7 steps on the ladder. The symbol was the same as the 7 stages of Borsippa, the pyramid of vitrified brick near Babylon, built of 7 stages, and each of a different color, interestingly. Oh, but that was gorgeous to see, wasn't it? In the Mithraic ceremonies, the candidate went through 7 stages of initiation, passing through many fearful trials, and of these, the high ladder with 7 rounds or steps was the symbol. So we know that the ancient rituals was associated with the ladder, just precisely as in Freemasonry. I'm on page 11.